Good morning from Pasadena, where it's still early in the morning. Still drinking my morning coffee. The good news this morning here from Pasadena is the winds have died down, the humidity levels have increased, but the bad news is that means it's really quite smoky here. But thanks for joining us this morning. We've got a great program today, and we had a wonderful kickoff session this morning. And I think we've got a lot more really exciting work to talk about today. I'm really thrilled to introduce a speaker this morning, Professor Steve Lewandowsky. I have been a huge fan of his work for many years, as many of you know, going back to when I was a grad student in the late 80s and early 90s. I've done a lot of work over the years in trying to understand persuasion and how people use information or are exposed to information that is uncertain, imperfect, problematic, wrong, falsehoods. And that's been really the subject of my work over the years. And I've been a huge fan of Steve's work. And he has really influenced my thinking, in particular, very recently about a lot of the issues that have arisen here in the US about elections and election misinformation and other forms of misinformation and conspiratorial thinking. Steve's a cognitive scientist at the University of Bristol. And again, he's done really some of the seminal research on how online information and online information technologies intersect with human cognition. And what I really love about his work is how he really connects that to the implications for how people process online information as they deliberate for their democratic decisions and the information that they're receiving that they need for democratic decisions in political settings. He's been widely recognized for his work, receiving many awards, including a Discovery Outstanding Researcher Award from the Australian Research Council, Wolfson Research Merit Fellowship from the Royal Society, a Humboldt Research Award from the Humboldt Foundation in Germany. He's a fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences in the UK and a fellow of the Association of Psychological Science. And he's one of the most highly cited researchers in the world. I'm just so thrilled that he could join us today, and I look forward to hearing his comments as he talks about his thoughts about the microtargeting manipulation machine, the title of his talk. So Steve, take it over.
Okay, thanks so much, Michael, for the kind introduction. Now, I'm about to share my screen, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Yes, can you see them now?
Great.
All right, terrific. Yeah, so I want to talk about what I call the microtargeting manipulation machine. It's a collaborative project with a number of fantastic postdocs and colleagues. And basically, what I'm talking about here is the personalization of advertising. Now, advertising has been segmenting audiences forever, ever since ads became available, because obviously the best ad is the one you only show to people who buy your product. Showing an ad to people who are not interested in what you have to sell is simply wasting money, and it's driving up prices. And that's pretty obvious, and it's pretty benign. There's no point in having toy advertisements on TV after kids tend to go to bed, for example. And there's nothing wrong with that. But modern technology has gotten to the point where there is a problem, because advertisers can target people in ways that are probably problematic. Now, here's a paper that just came out that looked at what Google allows advertisers to do. Well, if you advertise through Google, then you can match your ads to keywords that people are using in their searches. Sounds benign, except it turns out that alternative, quote unquote, cancer clinics targeted the search keys that are being used by cancer patients, and thus giving prominence to their pseudoscientific alternative treatment options whenever people looked for reputable cancer centers. So, for example, in this instance, the researchers were able to show that whenever you type in a search term for a cancer center, the ads that you get are for these alternative pseudoscientific so-called clinics in Mexico or Arizona or whatever. So that is problematic. That's just one instance of problematic advertising. The other one I want to focus on most today is what's called as what I call, many people call microtargeting, which is that you're targeting messages to manipulate people based on their vulnerabilities. For example, we know from some time ago that Facebook can determine moment to moment emotion of their users. They can identify when teenagers need a confidence boost, and they are in principle able to pass that on to advertisers so they can then advertise to people in their momentary emotional state. And of course, who knows if they do that with good intentions. Now, in this case, Facebook did not dispute the existence of the technology, but claimed that it was never made available to advertisers. Maybe. But I think there is a sort of a broad arc from, on the one hand, audience segmentation that is completely legitimate to this micro-targeted manipulation where things become a little problematic, no matter how you feel about Facebook. When it comes to sort of identifying emotion in teenagers so you can then ping them with a message, well, somewhere along the line we have a problem. Now, there's been some literature on this micro-targeting. People have raised a number of concerns. I mean, the first one, obviously, is that people rarely consent to their data being used in that manner. I mean, they join Facebook and click some box, but they don't really understand what is happening. The other concern is that you can infer people's personality, and I'll have lots more to say about that later, based on how they interact with Facebook, their digital footprint, the sort of likes and emoticons and all that. Well, it turns out you can determine somebody's personality from that. And that then allows you to send messages to people that is exploiting those personal vulnerabilities where the true intent of the message is completely concealed. No one knows that you're being targeted in this manner. And also because everything becomes customized, if you take this to the political domain, the opposing politician never knows what is being said in those messages that, in an extreme case, might only be known to one recipient and one sender. So where's the free marketplace of ideas? Well, it's gone because there's no rebuttal that is possible. And, politicians can make mutually incompatible promises to different segments of the electorate. And this is far from an imaginary concern because one of them got caught. This is the leader of a German center-right party, the Libertarian Party. Those are two ads in German. So here they are in English, translated, dealing with climate change. And this was in the lead up to some election, European election or German election. I can't remember the details. On the left, he says, we need a clear limit on CO2 emissions. On the right, the same guy, same smiley beard and everything, says, how do we manage this? Well, innovation, less regulation, more innovation. Two things seem to be very kind of like almost incompatible. Guess what? The ad on the left was distributed via Facebook to people who liked organic food and climate protection. The one on the right was distributed out. So, you have a case. Totally, very contradictory promises being made by the same politician to different audiences. So these concerns are not, I think, without foundation. We do have to take them seriously. Now, the public, as it turns out, overwhelmingly rejects political microtargeting. We did a study a few years ago in the US, the UK, and Germany, and everywhere people object to their personal data being used for political microtargeting. And yet, for all we know, it is happening. So there are three questions that I want to address today, or tell you about how we try to address it. Can we detect microtargeting? Is it effective? Is it more persuasive if you get a message that is tailored to you? And can we somehow defang it? So those are the questions to tell you about, spread over, a variety of papers, some of which have been published already. Let's first turn to the detection. Well, models that are linking a person's personality to text in two different ways. First of all, here's something we call model one. We pull
Stephen,
over 1,000 or so.
Stephen, I'm
And
sorry
they're
to interrupt. Can I ask you to turn off your camera? It seems like we're having some bandwidth issues on your side. Do you mind just turning off your camera so your bandwidth can still hold audio? Let's see if that improves.
How's that?
Thank you. Yeah, let's see if this picks it up. Thanks.
Okay. So, yeah, I don't know. It all seems fine at my end. Okay. So model one, we got Reddit participants with their consent, measured their personality, and analyzed text that they had produced on Reddit, as people do. We developed a model that was able to identify a person's personality from the text they produced. And we then, well, here's, I've already said that basically we can skip over that. This is just detail. We were able to predict people's personality from the comments that they wrote. Now, that's nothing new. That has been done before. But what we then did was to develop Model 2. Now, Model 2 was done on a much larger sample of Reddit users. And this time, the users didn't know that they were in any experiment. In fact, they weren't in an experiment. What we did was to take their comments that they left behind on Reddit. We applied Model 1 to predict their personality. And we then developed another model that linked their predictive personality to what those people read. Now, to understand this, you have to know that we looked at communities of fiction writing where people join these subreddits to read and then comment on fiction. So we can identify text that they like to read and then comment on. So we used Model 1 to predict their personality from their comments. We then developed this Model 2 that linked their predictive personality to what they read. So what do we have now? We now have a model that identifies a person's personality not from what they write, but from what they read. And that gives us an opportunity to customize messages that they should like based on their personality. Performance of both models is reasonable. Model 1 is at the leading edge of other models that have done similar things. Model 2 has what sounds like low correlation coefficients, but if you compare those to other precedents, then if you look at, the effect of pain relievers on pain relief, antihistamines on sneezing, etc., those are correlations in the same order of magnitude, even though those are considered to be effective drugs. So let me illustrate what we're talking about here. We looked at 1,500 Facebook ads that ran in the UK, sort of probably 4 or 5 years ago. This one obviously was during the pandemic. This was identified by our model as being the lowest in appeal to people who are high on openness. In other words, People low on openness, personality dimension that relates to how much people are sort of open to experience. People who are low on that would love this ad. People who are high on openness, the model predicted, would love this ad on the right. And if you just read that text, it's kind of like, yeah, okay, this does make sense intuitively. Well, it's not just intuitive. We can also confirm it through data. What you're seeing here is people's participants' judgment of an ad as being appealing to people high and low in openness. And that's superimposed with a model performance where the yellow is highest in openness, the blue lowest, according to the model. And as you can see, you know, the orange or yellow tends to be at the top, the blue tends to be at the bottom. Statistically, there's a very good differentiation between openness by both people and the model. So what does that tell us? That tells us we now have a machine, a model that can automatically detect text that aligns with the person's personality. Meaning we can say, hey, I have some text that should be particularly interesting for people of a certain personality. Now that gives us a tool that allows us to identify when a person is being presented with a political message, whether or not that might be micro-targeted. If there's a match between that message and a person's personality, then we might speculate that perhaps they're being micro-targeted. Now, let's turn to the second question. Does this actually matter? Is micro-targeting persuasive? Are they affected by this? Well, we performed a number of experiments where we again looked at the openness personality dimension with people's consent. We got their openness scores on a personality inventory. We then presented them with ads that we knew to be high or low in openness based on our machine learning model. And we asked people how persuasive they found those ads to be. Here are the items that we asked people about. You know, there's a whole bunch. I find this persuasive. Yeah, I don't click on this link. Overall, I like it, etc., etc. This has been used in previous research and is a good proxy for persuasiveness. And we then asked, okay, whatever the person's openness is, how much is the match to the openness of the ad important to their persuasiveness rating? And the idea is that if micro-targeting works, then the closer the match, the closer these points are to the diagonal line, the more persuasive an ad should be because it is precisely matched to a person's personality. And if there's a mismatch, then it should be less persuasive. Is that the case? Yes. Now, what you see here are the data, persuasiveness as a function of the match between a person and the ad. That thick line on the right is not flat, as you can see. It is negatively inclined, meaning that the more the ad differs from the person's personality, the less persuasive it is judged to be. In other words, we now have a machine that tells us how persuasive a message is for a given person. Now, the first study was real Facebook ads. Can we automate this? Can we go to AI and custom design on an industrial scale persuasive ads? Well, the answer is yes. Here are some examples. The original text is on the left. And we then asked ChatGPT or whatever, GPT-3, rewrite this to appeal to people high on openness. And guess what? It does that. Experience the extraordinary and join the global movement. You know, I mean, it's a weird way to talk about vaccines, but oh boy, it's open, isn't it? High in openness. Low in openness. Oh, protect yourself and your family, get your vaccines and stay safe. Now, according to ChatGPT, those two versions of the ads should be differentially persuasive for people based on their personality. And guess what? Yes, that is precisely what we find. Again, the lines here are not flat. The effect is small, but it is statistically highly significant. And we've now replicated this about 7 or 8 times. So we're now pretty convinced that our machine learning model can predict how much a person will be swayed by text based on the match to their personality. Now, if we take that for granted, then there's one question we got to consider. How would this work in practice? Is there any point in doing this from an advertiser's point of view? And the answer is actually yes, because if you place an ad on Facebook, then you can choose all sorts of attributes of people that you want that ad to be shown to. Here is just a random sample that I grabbed off the Facebook interface at a point when I was placing an ad to recruit participants for an experiment. You can choose people's interests, their behavior, location, etc., etc. Now, there is a slight complication here, and that is that interests are a little more than simply being interests, because the interests of a person determine or reflect their personality. Here's a study from about 10 years ago, done again with people's consent. They were, given the personality inventory. There were thousands and thousands of participants here. This was done while Facebook was still wide open, and you can look at people's likes. That was publicly available at the time. And what you can see here is that basically, if you have 10 likes of a person, you can predict their personality better than their colleagues. If you have 300 likes, you can predict it better than their own spouse. So your interests that you reveal on Facebook also reveal your personality, opening an avenue for advertisers to target you on the personality. And as I've just shown, those targeted ads are more persuasive. We've now shown this in multiple experiments. And just in case you wonder whether Facebook knows this, well, yes, not only do they know this, they have a patent that is linking that allows them to infer personality characteristics that can be used for targeting, ranking, selecting versions of products, and various other purposes. So Facebook knows. And we now also know that we can tailor ads at scale through AI. We can target people based on their personality on Facebook without Facebook even knowing this. And the door is open to manipulation. Now, by the way, this is not an isolated finding. Just for breadth, I'm including a very recent paper, just came out a week ago or so, where the researchers were training an AI model to target people based on their personal profile with messages, with phishing attacks, sending them messages to get them to click on the link, thereby revealing, and then maybe enter their password or whatever, thereby phishing for their identity or access to their bank account or whatever. What's remarkable here is that the AI did all this on its own. It identified who the people were by doing a web crawl. It then crafted customized emails. And as you can see here, the success rate is vastly greater than in a control group that just got a sort of a random phishing message, hello, click on this link and I'll give you $1 million or whatever. One of those things, the AI just, wow, performed far better. So now we do arguably have a problem, I would suggest. So what do we do about it? Now, in Europe, the EU is taking this quite seriously. And they're producing, or they're in the process of producing, an Artificial Intelligence Act. And their act which is not yet in force, as you can see, it's coming online in about 18 months or so, but it's going through the legislative process at the moment. It emphasizes transparency. It is emphasizing that whenever people interact with AI, they should know that that is what they're doing. And of course, who can argue with that in a sense? That's probably a good thing. Transparency is always good. However, is it sufficient? Does transparency actually achieve what it is the legislation wants it to do? Well, that takes us to the third research question I was going to tell you about today, which is how can we defang microtargeting? Supposing we tell people that they're being targeted, what happens? Well, to find out, we ran 3 more experiments where we went back to the real Facebook ads you've already seen from before. We again got persuasiveness ratings exactly the same as before. We had people's personality again the same as before, with their consent, of course. But what we then did was to add another intervention. And the intervention was that half the ads that were targeted at a person's personality came with a pop-up that warned them that this ad might be micro-targeted. I'll show you that in a second. The other targeted ads did not have a pop-up. So we can now run an experiment where on the one hand, we can observe whether or not targeting makes a difference, because we have non-targeted and targeted ads, so we can make sure the targeting still works. And then for half the targeted ads, we're telling people they're being targeted. Will that make a difference? And just to show you what this critical contrast involved, here is a targeted ad with a pop-up. So this is probably low in openness. So this would only be this would only come with a pop-up if the person matched that personality. And it is a warning. It says, whoa, this advertisement is so appealing to you. I wonder if this might be micro-targeting. And we sort of explain what that means. We had 3 different studies with 3 different ways of formulating this. Making it stronger and stronger, with this sort of explanation at the outset. Don't be manipulated. Micro-targeting is really bad. People hate it, and then warning them, this ad is micro-targeting you. Does that make a difference? No difference at all. Let me draw your attention to the top 2 rows. The green dots and confidence intervals are the contrast between ads that are not targeted and those that are targeted. Now, that contrast is significant and large in all 3 studies. It sits outside that narrow strip of a region of equivalence in all 3 cases. And that is just replicating the persuasiveness advantage of targeting. What previously in the first couple of experiments was that slanted line that was negative, we've replaced that here with just a contrast and dots that are sitting outside the region of equivalence. So it replicates, yet again, 3 more demonstrations of the targeting effect. Now turn to the top row. That's the effect of the pop-up. This is comparing targeted ads with and without the pop-up. And what do you see? You see that it makes no difference. In studies 4 and 5, despite large samples, hundreds, if not 1,000 people, no significant difference. In the last study, yeah, there is a significant difference, but it sits within this region of equivalence, which is the vertical blue strip. So in terms of practical import, does it make a difference? No. No difference whatsoever. You can tell people you're being micro-targeted. They say, oh, thank you. But they're equally convinced by the targeted ad than they would have been without the warning. So that gets me to the end of my talk. These are the conclusions. We can predict what text people prefer to consume on the basis of their personality. That means we can identify messages that are particularly persuasive to people, which means that if I want to manipulate people, I can produce those messages and validate them before I send them to people to exploit their personality. We know that works. Micro-targeting based on personality maximizes persuasiveness. And that advantage is not canceled by warning people. It persists unabated. So whatever the intent is behind transparency, and that is laudable, it may not make a difference at all. And with that, I thank you and for your attention, and I look forward to the questions.
Gosh, what amazing stuff. One of the things that a couple of folks have raised, kind of a question that I also noted too, is that, you know, in the political science literature, folks largely have focused on demographic micro-targeting. Have you compared the effectiveness of the personality-based micro-targeting to more demographic-based micro-targeting?
No. Very good point. No, we have not.
Okay. Do you want to speculate? Do you think that it might be more effective than demographic-based micro-targeting?
I doubt it. I doubt it. I think, you know, if you know whether somebody's male or female, you probably have, you know, that's a powerful thing. And, you know, no question. But you see, to me, that's also not such a big deal. Maybe it should be, but, you know, people who are women know they're female, and men do that conversely, know they're male. So it's not like that you're exploiting anything hidden. And if you look at our study on public opinion, you find that people are quite comfortable with customization based on gender. I forget what else, where they live. Perhaps, I can't remember now the details, but where they say no, no, no is when it comes to sensitive characteristics like their sexual orientation, race, income, and yes, personality, their personal characteristics. So we focused on this because it is kind of, you know, people dislike it, and it's also kind of creepy.
Yeah,
I think and that's why we focused on personality. That's not to say it's the biggest effect out there, not at all. But it may give you an edge if you scale it up.
Yeah, that's when I actually I taught a class this fall on campaigns and presidential campaigns. We spent an entire 90 minutes talking about micro-targeting, and I think all 40 or plus of the students in my class were totally freaked out when they learned what's possible. And that was just talking about demographic-based micro-targeting. What about other, not personality, but other kind of ways you could model proclivities? Like I mentioned the isms. Betsy Sinclair mentioned conspiratorial thinking. Have you all thought about moving in that direction? Because obviously with this kind of machine learning approach, you could model propensity to believe in populism or to believe.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, easy. Yes.
And
yes, you can.
Haven't tried that yet, though?
Oh, well, it depends what you mean by trying. I mean, no, I I have enough language models to identify a lot of different things. What we haven't done is to then do the extra mile of testing whether it's more persuasive if you write something with that. No, we haven't done that. But we can certainly identify people's, you know, all sorts of things from their text, including their conspiratorial tendencies. I have a postdoc, Alessandro Maiani, who's worked on that. So yeah, it can be done, and the same with populism and various other things. And then, of course, that opens the door to then target people on that basis.
Right.
And by the way, just one comment to make here in this, that targeting is not necessarily all bad, depending on the circumstances. Okay. So, for example, the Google advertising thing that I mentioned at the outset, you can match keywords in the search. And then as an advertiser, you can advertise your pseudoscience quackery, when people look for cancer information. But of course, that could also be done by the National Cancer Institute, providing people with support when they are seemingly in trouble. Or you can, if people are interested in tobacco, they could be given health messages, maybe telling them, "Well, are you sure about that?" So the whole thing is not totally straightforward ethically. I think it's very concerning if political operatives are exploiting vulnerabilities to manipulate people. But there can be circumstances where, if you're honest about it, targeting can actually be in favor of public health, right?
Right. Yeah. And in a sense, like Betsy just noted in the chat, these kind of tools could also be used, right, in the fight, against misinformation.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. That was our intent, that we wanted to reverse engineer microtargeting. That was our goal. And that means develop a model that can tell a user when they're being targeted. And the pop-up experiments were basically simulating that, right? They were kind of simulating a browser plugin that would alert people when there's something fishy because the match is too close. And the technology is there for us to develop that. We have the model, and it's entirely possible to make this happen. But given that it doesn't seem to have an effect, we're now wondering, well, is that the way to go?
Well, in terms of the non-effect of the warnings, one thing that Christina raised is whether you've been able to examine, maybe are there different ways to target the warnings? Is there different messages about the warnings, or is there any indication in your data that there might be different kinds of warnings that might work better?
Well, as I mentioned briefly, we tried different sort of doses of this. We started out with just a pop-up saying, "Be careful, you're being targeted." That had no effect. Then we thought, oh, okay, we have to explain this better. So we gave people this long explanation, and we tested their comprehension before they could go on. So we made sure they understand the problem and what it means. No difference. And we have another parallel study done by colleagues in Berlin using a different type of ads, and they found similar results. So we have tried a number of different things, and so far nothing has made a difference.
Instead of individual user warnings, what about deploying your machine to find the, say, sites or accounts or actors who are engaged in this kind of micro-targeting and advertising that?
Absolutely. That to me, yes. I mean, ideally, if we now had another few $1 million, we would now go out and put this to work and look at political messages by certain, sources and see if they're sent to people. I mean, yes, we could. I mean, in principle, the technology exists for us to be able to go out and identify users' personality without their knowledge, right? I mean, it's spooky, but we can do that. And we can then also identify where the messages they're getting is matching their personality. And we can then maybe trace it back to the people who are doing this. And we can say, hey, these are manipulators because they're sending messages to people with different personalities that match their personality. Don't tell me that's coincidence. Yeah, we could do that. But it's a massive effort. And
I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying we could do it, but give us a few $1 million and access to the data, and yeah, we can. But of course, a lot of the stuff now is becoming increasingly difficult because the platforms are less and less interested in anything other than their profits. I mean, you look at the last few weeks, and certainly in the US. In Europe, it's a little better. There's still nominal government that is holding them accountable, sort of. But it would be very difficult to do.
So, and that leads me to a question I had too, which is, given like Meta's recent decision to start moving away from fact checking,
Exactly.
that opens the door for these kinds of approaches to be even more widespread and more easily developed.
Yeah.
Is that
Of course. Of course. It opens the door to epistemic chaos. Yeah, of course.
absolutely okay? So we should be
and who benefits from epistemic chaos? People with a lot of power, because they don't care and they can escape accountability if you have epistemic chaos. So, it works beautifully.
One of the things Joanna raised an interesting thing about a question about the warnings. Maybe it's the case that these micro-targeted messages are actually really, really good. And people agree with the content so much that the warning just doesn't matter because they
love it. Yeah.
Yeah,
that indeed. Well, in fact, the other study I alluded to that I'm also part of, but it's a separate stream, where we looked at cosmetic ads, so not political messages. If you tell people they're being targeted there, they actually like the ad. Yeah, the measure was liking, not persuasiveness. And people love ads that are being targeted to them, cosmetic ads. So if you get an ad for a lipstick that matches your personality, you like it a lot better. And if then somebody tells you, oh, you're being micro-targeted, they still like it, because, oh, cool, it's my lipstick. Why wouldn't I like it? So yeah, I think that's entirely possible, that people are, in fact, they like the stuff. But if you ask them whether they want to be targeted, they say no with an overwhelming, like 80% agreement. People do not want their personal information being used for political messages being targeted. But whether they then in the moment still like it is a completely different question.
So in the previous session, we saw some research that indicates that the messenger matters. So I also wonder if perhaps the messenger sent, who is it who's telling you that you're being targeted?
That's the point. We haven't looked at that. No, we haven't looked at it. We told people that this is, what did we tell them? We told them that we're working on an experimental sort of prototype machine that detects when you're being targeted, and we're trying it out in this experiment, something like that. And so we explained, we were honest, basically, and told them, that it was us in a sense, that the ads were real, but that the warning came from us. We were honest about that. Now, to be honest, as a first approximation overall, I continue to be surprised by how little the source matters. In many contexts. There's a recent paper by David Rand and colleagues showing that fact checks are effective even for people who distrust fact checkers. They may distrust them, but they're still affected by the correction. We published a paper where we corrected misinformation by Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, and we targeted at the followers of those two people. And then we manipulated whether it was an in-group or out-group that provided the correction. And it turns out it doesn't matter. Quite surprisingly, Trump voters accept the correction by Democrats. Mind you, that was done in 2016, 17. So, things may have changed. But there are multiple demonstrations of this, that even if people dismiss the source, they're still affected by the message.
Right. Sorry, there's just so much conversation in chat right now. I'm just trying to track it. Can we back up a sec? Betsy asked something earlier that I was curious about as well, which is you talked a lot about the personality trait of openness. Did the modeling, does it really map into the personality domains we typically think of, like the Big 10, the Big 5?
Big 5, yes. Well, it has to, because we ran 5 different models.
Okay,
so for each dimension. And we can predict all 5 to varying degrees. There's a range of predictability, and openness had the highest the highest R. So it's the best, the most easily predicted dimension. So we focused on that, but we've also done it with introversion, extroversion. The cosmetic stuff was introversion, extroversion. And in general, we can predict. I think there was one that was really bad. I can't remember now what it was. Sorry. One of the 5 was iffy.
And I'm also curious a little bit about the details and the mechanics of the machine learning model. I mean, what can you speak a little bit as to just the detailed methodological details of the predictive models that you were using?
Model 2, the second one, or the first?
The second one.
The second one, yeah, the second one is kind of funky because the ground truth is a prediction by another model. So because what we're trying to simulate here is the situation where all you have access to is what people read and write. And that is exactly what happened in when we developed Model 2. We looked at Reddit and we knew what they read because it was a fiction Reddit. So we all knew they had to read the fiction. And then they could choose to comment on it. So we had input and output from these people. Now, how do you then build a model? Well, the only way that we thought we could do it is by predicting their personality from what they wrote, the comments, because we had that other model that tells us we can do this. And then we use that as a ground truth. We pretended that was their personality, and we gave that as the learning signal to the second model, which linked that ground truth with the consumed text. Right? So we trained the model by giving it as a ground truth the prediction of another model. Now we validated this in we had all sorts of tweaks to this and confirmed that that was legitimate. And of course, the proof is in the pudding. If we then take that Model 2, even though the ground truth was a prediction of another model, it identifies ads in a way that is completely consonant with human judgments and determines persuasiveness. So, I think it works.
Can you take a model like this that's trained on Reddit data, right? And then maybe use it in an entirely different context? I mean, again, if you know some of the attributes, would you be confident that it would work? Like if you took it completely different?
That's what we did, right? I mean, we trained it on Reddit fiction. We then took the model as it is, and we fed it ChatGPT generated political messages, and it works.
Okay. So that's the essential test of.
Yes. That is the test. The test is in going from Reddit to Facebook ads and to ChatGPT generated ads and to persuasiveness and validation over and over again. We're asking people is this ad high or low in openness? And we compare the judgment of people to the model, and the alignment is beautiful. So it works. And this was one interesting result, actually, that Model 2 was not learning content. It wasn't picking up specific content like whatever, apples and oranges or kitchen tables or whatever. It was mainly how people express themselves. It was mainly verbs and phrases that it linked to different personalities, not the content, if you know what I mean. I have a word cloud somewhere that I can dig out where we show what Model 2 is picking up on, and it is picking up more style than content. And that, I think, is why it transfers to other ads.
Jonathan Nagler asked, I think, a really interesting question. Do you think we're going to expect more of this kind of micro-targeting? Because obviously more data, more the ability to do this kind of model, we're going to see more.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm convinced of that. Why wouldn't we? I mean, if you're a politician, you want to run the world, and this is the way to go. You just manipulate people into whatever you want them to think. And one of the ways in which you can do that is to exploit your communication advantage to the max by matching their personality. So yeah, no, I think that's entirely plausible.
So Betsy had asked how stable these personality measures or attributes are over time in like social media data. Are they similar, stable to what we see in like public opinion data, polling data, other forms of studies of the Big Five, for example?
Well, that's a very good point. Now, I think people's personality we know to be stable, pretty stable. Okay. I mean, whatever your profile is when you're 35 probably is the same when you're 52. You know, I mean, some jiggle room there, but we know that personality is pretty stable over a lifetime. So that's not the problem. The problem, however, is that the way Facebook likes can be used to infer your personality is bound to change over time. So, for example, we looked at a study that predated the UU et al. Paper. I think this is a Kozlowski study from 2012, roughly, where they published the likes that are linked to personality. There's an online supplement. You can go there and you can get the list of likes for each personality type. And if you look at the list of likes, then you look at this and you figure, what? What is this? And then you sort of Google it. It turns out it was some rock band, you know, that was popular in 2012 and folded in 2015, and that predicted introversion or whatever. Well, obviously now, you know, if you go to Facebook, that's useless. So the specific likes that people will choose now on Facebook are very different from those 15 years ago. But you could redo the study now if you had access to the data, and I'm sure Facebook is doing this and has done it because they have all the data. You just identify a new set of likes and you keep it constantly updated. You know, some new film comes along, anybody who likes that movie, you know, aha, extrovert. I bet you that's, you know, constantly changing. But it's not the personality that's changing. It's just what, you know, whatever is out there that people like, that changes.
This is all very dark. I'm sorry. So
It is.
Yeah. But again, so if the warnings don't work, and we think though that perhaps maybe profiling the accounts or agents or actors who are engaged in these kinds of behaviors and maybe publicizing them might work. What are some of the other ways in which this kind of micro-targeting at least might be regulated if what looks like the EU's approach may not work?
Well, I think it had, well, I mean, this is a hopeless request to make in the current economic and political climate. But of course, if we really seriously wanted to solve this problem, it has to be done by regulation, and the platforms have to be responsible for what's going on. Now, which, by the way, is tricky because Facebook doesn't necessarily know when they're being used for micro-targeting, because all they know is that they get an ad that is supposed to be shown to motorcycle owners in Minnesota or whatever. Okay, now they don't know why that ad is shown to the motorcycle owners, but it might be that that is because they tend to have a certain personality and hence the message is customized to exploit that. So the platforms don't necessarily, in theory, don't have to know what's going on, because the political operatives may be the ones who have the knowledge and then just launch these ads based on innocent requests, based on interests. But what's in the background is something more sinister. However, Facebook can find out by just constantly doing what we're doing, you know, doing the reverse engineering, trying to figure out, well, hang on, what's going on here? Are these messages being targeted? So it is entirely possible for Facebook to be regulated, to say you must guard against this. And the way you do it is by constantly monitoring it and running the models, teaching the models, and identifying, as we have done, when there's too much of a match, you know, and then reverse engineer that. So technologically, it's possible. And Facebook could do this if they wanted to.
Yeah, your chuckle there means you don't think they're going to.
Well, no, of course not. It makes them money.
Certainly.
All of this, right? I mean, that's the whole point. It keeps people on the platform longer, and they can. That's how they make money. So, Facebook has no interest whatsoever in putting an end to this, or misinformation or anything else. And quite on the contrary, misinformation is clickbait. It's wonderful for Facebook. Facebook is a machine to produce misinformation. That's how they make their money. There's plenty of data on that out there, that misinformation tends to be outrage evoking, on average, and that Facebook is making a lot of money out of outrage, far more than any other emotion. So why would Facebook? I mean, the last thing they want to do is fact check, because they make a lot of money out of misinformation.
Again, I think your work here is showing that, going back to what we were saying earlier, that these personality-based ads, might be more effective than the other forms of targeting, and therefore people are going to like them, right?
Yeah.
More clicks. And
possibly more effective. I don't want to comment on that, but we do know that yeah, people like things, that are easy, that kind of, resonate with their personality. Sure.
Well, great. That has been a wonderful conversation. I really want to thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Wish we could have been in person, but we'll solve that at some point.
Yes, let's hope so.
And we will take a break, and we will reconvene at 10 a.m. Pacific. So thank you, Steve.
Okay, you bet.
All right. We'll be right back.